Good evening and welcome to On the Record, I-24 News' in-depth interview show. Every week, I'll be speaking with key experts and decision makers from Israel and around the region on the core issues concerning the Middle East. I'm happy to introduce our guest tonight, Gershon Baskin. Baskin is a veteran peace negotiator who actively mediated the Gaza ceasefire deal, as well as the 2011 Gilad Shalit deal. He is a co-founder of the Alliance for Two States and is the Middle East director at the International Communities Organization, a UK-based NGO. Gershon Baskin, thank you very much for joining us this evening.
Thank you, Ariel, for hosting me.
So let's dive straight into it. This week saw a significant step forward in the Gaza ceasefire agreement with the locating and return of the body of the last remaining hostage in the Gaza Strip. This is Ran Gvili. Now, in the coming days, the Rafah border crossing is expected to reopen, marking the end of phase one. And it would seem that the pieces for phase two are pretty much set up. We have the Board of Peace, we have the Gaza Technocratic government. So what is next for Gaza?
First of all, it's worth indicating that this is really a reason for celebration with the return of Ran Gvili, because it's the first time since 2014 that there is no Israeli hostage in Gaza. Mm-hmm. So there's really a turning point and a new page, a new chapter in our relationship with Gaza and perhaps with the Palestinians. What needs to be finished by the Americans in enabling phase two to enter into full force is the establishment of a Palestinian security force and the deployment of the International Stabilization Force. Both of these are essential for the important task of demilitarizing Gaza, of decommissioning the weapons from Hamas, and facilitating further withdrawals from Israel from the yellow line that it now holds, controlling 53% of Gaza, back toward the Israeli border.
Mm-hmm. So you touched on the issue of Hamas's disarmament. And in fact, U.S. officials have said that reconstruction of the Gaza Strip won't happen until the disarmament of Hamas begins, meaning that this is going to need to be the first step or one of the first steps. Now, Hamas says that it won't disarm as long as the Israeli occupation is ongoing. The thing is, as far as Hamas is concerned, the Israeli occupation is also in Tel Aviv and Haifa. So what hopes are there for the disarmament process to actually be successful?
Yeah, first of all, I would take with a very large grain of salt the American statement that reconstruction will not begin until Hamas is demilitarized, because according to the Americans themselves, it's a process that will take months. In a conversation I had with Witkoff, he talked about 6 months. And reconstruction of Gaza has to happen immediately. It should have happened already 3.5 months ago, because there are 2 million people who are living in situations which is not suitable for human beings, particularly given the harsh weather that we've had over the last month and a half. People living in tents, more than 1 million people, which have been flooded and blown away in the wind. So that situation needs to be corrected as quickly as possible. People need infrastructure, they need electricity, they need water, there needs to be sanitation. All those things are not going to wait for Hamas to be demilitarized. The process of demilitarization, as I said, will take time. It will involve agreement by Hamas to be demilitarized or to have their offensive weapons decommissioned in one way or another. There are different American plans for doing it. The Americans are also including in their plan for the demilitarization of Hamas and the removal of Hamas from power in Gaza the possibility of amnesty for some of the Hamas commanders and fighters, or terrorists, or whatever word you want to use to describe them. Them and their families probably going to places like Turkey. We will see how that develops. But these are issues that are being discussed through the mediators, mostly the Turks have been engaging Hamas on it. And I would not be surprised if a meeting didn't take place between Kushner, Witkoff, and the Hamas leadership in the coming period as well to discuss demilitarization.
Mm-hmm. I will just note that in the launching of the Board of Peace in Davos, Jared Kushner, Trump's son-in-law and key negotiator, he stated very clearly there will be no reconstruction until there is disarmament. So that is very interesting to see how that will move forward. But the body that is going to be...
Maybe there's maybe they're distinguishing between reconstruction and the temporary housing, which needs to come in. The head of the Palestinian Technocratic government, Dr. Ali Shah, talked about the need for 200,000 caravans to be brought into Gaza. We know that there are thousands of caravans waiting to get into Gaza, and they just need the approval of Israel to be sent into the Gaza Strip.
I would also imagine that the Gaza border crossing, the Rafah border crossing, needs to reopen in order for those caravans to enter. But sticking on the issue of disarmament, the body that is going to be responsible under Trump's plan for the disarmament is not going to be the International Stabilization Force as initially thought, but it's going to be the Palestinian Police Force, 10 to 15,000 personnel that have been trained in both Egypt and Jordan. They're going to not only disarm Hamas, but they're responsible, at least according to the plan, to dismantle Hamas's tunnel system. But they haven't been deployed yet. And Israelis are highly skeptical that a Palestinian police force will be successful in disarming Hamas. Do you understand this concern?
Of course, the concern is genuine. I think that it will not be a situation where the Palestinian security force will be encountering the Hamas gunmen and people with weapons with physical force. The process will not succeed unless Hamas is part of it. And that's why the Turks have engaged, the Turkish head of intelligence has engaged the Hamas leadership in continuation of talks about the demilitarization and the decommissioning of weapons. And this is why I believe there will be a meeting between Witkoff and Kushner and Khalil al-Khayr and other leaders from Hamas. If the Hamas leadership is not on board, it's not going to be done. So it has to be done in cooperation with Hamas. Hamas understands that this has to be done because there won't be massive amounts of money entering Gaza for reconstruction if Hamas poses a threat and if Hamas is in control. And this is the primary leverage that the Americans and others have over Hamas. Because they know that they can't allow the situation in Gaza to remain as it is, with Gaza totally destroyed and without an outlet for people to be able to return to some kind of normal life.
But Gershon, do you actually see Palestinian police entering Hamas's tunnels, setting up explosives and decommissioning them like Israeli special forces have been doing for the past some odd years in Gaza?
It's too early to judge. I wouldn't rule it out completely. I think that there will be cooperation of the Palestinian security force together with the Egyptians and perhaps others. I think that the Turks and the Qataris surprisingly might play a role in dealing with the Hamas forces on the ground once they are probably going to be deployed as part of the International Stabilization Force. It's a complex process, but the process begins with the agreement of the Hamas leadership on the outside to it moving forward. There will be no decommissioning of weapons and demilitarization without cooperation of Hamas, and this is very important to understand, and this is the leverage that the United States has over Hamas as well.
Hamas also wants to incorporate 10,000 of its police force in this Gaza police. I don't see that flying with Israel, but I agree that there's still a lot of details that need to be etched out between the sides. Now, what do you make of this new government in Gaza? I understand that you personally know a few of its members. Are these indeed the people who will save Gaza?
I don't know if they're going to save Gaza. They're all very qualified individuals who are not politically linked to any political party. They're not linked to any Arab country in particular. They are independent technocrats who have an enormous amount of work ahead of them. I know three of them personally for years. I worked with one of them for more than a year on a daily basis. The reason why it took so long to deploy, to announce the names, was that the Americans were having to address the agenda of Egypt and Jordan and the Palestinian Authority and the Emiratis and the Saudis and other forces involved who wanted to select their own people. All these people were vetted by the Americans, by Israel, by the Palestinian Authority, by Egypt and Jordan. And in the end, they came up with this list. And it was also decided, I think, rather intelligently, that it be announced by Egypt and not by the Americans. In other words, there's an Arab source which has announced the names of these people. They're in Egypt. They've been working in Egypt. They're waiting to enter into Gaza and to begin the hard work that's ahead of them. If they don't have cooperation from Israel, if Israel is an obstacle to their work, their mission will fail. And their mission is the governance of Gaza and the rebuilding of Gaza. And it's very important work for us in Israel because these people will remain our neighbors forever. And we should have an interest that life turns around in Gaza, that people have a reason to live rather than a reason to die. Hamas is finished in Gaza. Hamas cannot control Gaza. And what we need to ensure is that the people of Gaza have some kind of hope for a better future.
Mm-hmm. In the interim, Hamas is still in effective control of the Gaza Strip until...
Not really. I wouldn't say so. They're there because there's a vacuum. But the people of Gaza don't want them there. And many of these Hamas people who are holding guns know that they're holding their guns to protect themselves against the Gazans themselves. Surveys and studies and talks, and nothing really official and scientific, but the estimation is that more than 90% of Gazans never want to see someone from Hamas again.
Mm-hmm. Well, we'll see what horizon this new technocratic government provides the people of Gaza. They desperately need respite and also just, a reestablishment of all infrastructure and basically a new life. So it will be very interesting to see how successful this new technocratic government is in providing that. I still want to talk about Trump's plan. The first point in Trump's 20-point plan for Gaza is the de-radicalization of the Gaza Strip. Now, you have said many times that the Palestinians need to realize that armed resistance won't get them anywhere, and that without security for Israel, Palestinians won't have freedom, and vice versa. But in fact, every opinion poll among Palestinians since October 7th shows a majority of Palestinians in the West Bank support violence against Israel. So how can de-radicalization in both the Gaza Strip and the West Bank actually be achieved under these conditions?
Because it's a very good question. It's a very important question. It's essential. Palestinians who I engage with and talk about the fact that the armed struggle for the liberty of Palestine is finished will sometimes argue back that according to international law, they have a right to resist the Israeli military occupation with arms. And this is true. International law grants the right to resist a military occupation as it's defined by international law. But what I challenge them with is, how are you going to liberate Palestine? How are you going to have freedom? You're not going to do it by killing Israelis. The lesson of Gaza needs to be very, very strong for everyone, both in Gaza and in the West Bank, that through violence, through killing Israelis, through attacking Israel, they're never going to achieve their freedom. And there are more and more Palestinians who understand it. I was in Ramallah about a month ago doing an interview on a Saudi news television. And at the end of the interview, we went up to the roof of the building and looked out at Ramallah. And I know Ramallah very well. And one of the curious things that I tossed in my mind was looking out at Ramallah and other cities in the West Bank is, why is it so quiet? And the reason why it's so quiet is because everyone who lives there looks at Gaza. And they say, I don't want Ramallah, I don't want Nablus, I don't want Hebron, I don't want Tulkarem to look like Gaza. There is some kind of deterrence that was created by all the massive damage that Israel did in Gaza with regard to the West Bank. And while Hamas had a lot of support immediately after October 7th, because Palestinians actually thought that Hamas was going to liberate Palestine, the more that Palestinians have suffered over the past 2+ years, the more they're realizing that this is not the road they need to walk on. We're going to see Palestinian elections, first municipal elections in the end of April, and then national elections sometime in 2026. And we're going to see, I believe, the emergence of all kinds of new Palestinian political forces that are going to be much more pragmatic and much more understanding. That is, the Palestinian historian Rashid Khalidi said in his last book, The 100-Year War on Palestine, he wrote that we Palestinians need to get over our objection to Zionism and deal with the reality of Israel. And this is where Palestinians are going to be after October 7th. This is where they are today. They need to deal with the reality that Israel exists. Israel is going to continue to exist. And the sooner they accept the legitimacy, the collective legitimacy of the existence of the state of Israel, the sooner they will get an acceptance of their own collective legitimacy as a people with a right to self-determination.
Look, I totally share your position that free elections among Palestinians is crucial for ushering in any hope for a new future. I just am not as confident as you are that the elections will actually take place, as they're over a decade overdue. But I want to move on to more broadly the issue of negotiations. You began your mediation work over the deal to release Gilad Shalit, who was taken captive by Hamas in 2006 and released 5 years later in exchange for 1,027 prisoners, many of whom convicted terrorists. Now, there are many who argue that it was that deal that encouraged Yahya Sinwar, the former leader of Hamas, who was also released in the Shalit deal, to take more hostages, as they did in October 7th. So do you believe that the Gilad Shalit deal was a prelude or a leading factor to October 7th in some ways?
I believe that the Gilad Shalit deal was a deal which had to be made. It should have been made 6 months after he was abducted, when the deal was put on the table, and not 5 years later. Making Gilad Shalit, the Israeli who was held in captivity longer than any other Israeli alive since the birth of the State of Israel. The problem with the Shalit deal and what happened in October 7th is not the Shalit deal itself, but the reality, the fact that nothing happened between the release of Gilad Shalit in 2011 and October 7th to resolve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Now, I can tell you that being in a position in helping to secure the release of Gilad Shalit and working with the senior Mossad officer, David Meidan, and being in close contact with the Prime Minister's office at the time, I used my relations after Gilad Shalit came home in order to try and create a secret direct back channel of negotiations between Benjamin Netanyahu and Mahmoud Abbas. I visited Abbas 3 times, face-to-face meetings in 2012 and 2013, and secured his agreement to enter into direct secret back channel negotiations with Netanyahu. And it was Netanyahu who refused. The problem that led up to October 7th is the fact that we thought, or Israel thought, that it could manage the conflict, that it could reduce the conflict without addressing the conflict itself. This conflict will fester and it will reemerge over and over again if we don't attempt to resolve it. There is a solution on how to resolve it. Everyone knows it. It's the 2-state solution. There are solutions for all the issues in conflict, but someone has to be brave enough on the Israeli side to stand up and say, we need to make every effort possible in order to have a partner on the Palestinian side and negotiate a true peace deal. What we have going for us that we didn't have in the past now is a regional framework in which to do it. A regional security pact, a regional economic development pact, the support of the Arab neighbors that want Israel to be integrated, fully integrated into the region, but the price tag for that integration is resolving the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
Now, you described yourself as the Israeli who has engaged the most with Hamas, more than any other citizen in Israel. How did you come?
Except for prison guards.
Except for prison guards. So how did you come about this role?
It happened by chance. First of all, in September 2005, Hamas kidnapped and killed one of my wife's first cousins, Sasson Noriel. At that time, when he went missing before he was murdered and his body was found, I was asked by members of the family to try and help find him. I tried and I failed. And standing over his grave, I promised myself that I would do everything possible ever again if something like that happened. A few months later, I was at a World Bank conference in Cairo. I was the only Israeli there. And I was approached by a colleague, a professor of economics in Gaza, who was with another colleague, a professor of economics at the Islamic University and a member of Hamas, who came from Gaza to Cairo because he'd never met an Israeli before. I had never spoken to anyone from Hamas before. We spent about 6 hours talking during the 2 days of the conference. And afterwards, I proposed to him to start some kind of dialogue between the two sides, which advanced but never actually happened because the Hamas leadership vetoed it. To make a long story short, a week after Gilad Shalit was abducted, this professor called me and said, Gershon, we have to do something. I said, what can we do? He said, let's try to open up a channel of communication. He went to the Hamas Prime Minister's office. They called me. Later that afternoon, a phone call took place between Noam Shalit, Zichrono Levacha, Gilad's father, and one of the Hamas leaders. The next day, the Shalit parents came to Jerusalem. I met them and told them that I would be with them until the day that Gilad Shalit comes home. And that's a very long story of 5 years and 4 months, capsulated into a couple of sentences.
Yeah, I've heard the full story. It's a fascinating one. Unfortunately, we're limited here in time. I just will note, you've described that your interlocutor in Hamas is Ghazi Hamad.
He's been my main interlocutor for more than 18 years.
And he's senior Hamas official. In fact, he was one of the targets of the strike in Doha that that Israel carried out a couple months back. Are you still in contact with Ghazi Hamad?
A little bit. I would be very happy if I never have to talk to these guys again. Circumstances requires me to talk to them. I'm in contact with other Hamas people as well. Ghazi Hamad was one of the 4 Hamas people who sat at the table and signed the agreement to end the war and release all the hostages, sitting across the room from the Israeli delegation that was there as well. So he, by default, I think he rose to a much higher level of importance in Gaza. When I say default, it means that the other senior leaders of Hamas have all been executed by Israel, which raised Ghazi Hamad into a more senior position than he was in the past.
And he managed to survive the strike in Doha. Very
also, his house was bombed by Israel in the first days of the war, but he wasn't there.
All right. I want to move on to the last part of the show. This is the rapid fire segment. I'm going to show you 3 pictures, and you share with me the first thing that comes to mind. Briefly, please. So the first picture, this is Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas.
90 years old in the 22nd year of a 4-year term, totally delegitimized on the Palestinian street, and needs to be replaced as quickly as possible.
All right. Here's the next picture. This is the High Commissioner for Gaza under the Board of Peace, Nikolai Mladenov.
A good man, did a good job when he was the UN representative under Ban Ki-moon and negotiated 3 ceasefire agreements. It's a pity that he's not a Palestinian, because there needs to be a Palestinian on the executive committee giving Palestinians agency. But he's a good person.
All right. The last picture for this evening, this is a clip from a video of Hamas executing Gazans after the ceasefire in the Strip took effect.
Just one more proof that Hamas is an organization that needs to be removed from the face of the earth. These people are brutal. These people have a distorted view of Islam, who have turned Islam into a religion that sanctifies death, rather than Islam being a religion that sanctifies life. They're a small minority within the Muslim world, and they are an atrocious reality that we and Palestinians have had to live with for too many years.
And so, given the current situation inside the Gaza Strip, you said that the fact that Hamas is still on the ground, that is simply because there is no such thing as a vacuum. But once the new Gazan police is deployed, with or without Hamas in its ranks, what will happen to the 40,000 Hamas fighters that are currently there?
Yeah, first of all, I think that number is highly inflated. There were 40,000 people involved in the Hamas administration of Gaza. A lot of them are civil servants who were never really Hamas people. They were employed in the various government ministries. A lot of the people who were in the blue police were not ideological Hamas people either. And I assume that those people who will be integrated into the new Palestinian police force, subordinate to the Palestinian Technocratic government and the executive committee of the Board of Peace, will be people who are not ideologically Hamas, but they're having a job. If they got $250 or $300 from Hamas a month and a gun, they're going to get $600 or $800 or $1,000 a month from the new government and a nice uniform and be subordinate. I think it's important to integrate as many of them as possible into the new Palestinian security force, because that has to be one of the lessons learned from what the Americans did in Iraq, which was a huge failure of simply dismissing 250,000 members of Saddam Hussein's army, who then became insurgents.
Well, I totally agree with you that we are on the precipice of a very interesting and crucial moment in the future of Israel-Palestinian relations, and specifically with the Gaza Strip. And I personally want to thank you for your mediation efforts. It's not every day that an Israeli manages to foster his connections and bring upon a crucial ceasefire and hostage release deal that was completed fully this week. So thank you on a personal note, and also thank you for joining me this evening. Very interesting stuff, Gershon. That's all the time we have this week. I want to thank you again, Gershon Baskin, for your time and interesting insight. Join us again next week here at On the Record. You can find today's episode and all previous shows on YouTube and Spotify. Thank you for watching.